Thank you all so much for giving me this opportunity. I think I can say with absolute honesty that this is the most distinguished group of scholars that I have ever presented to. And I am very appreciative that you have all extended your work days to stay and listen to this presentation. After listening to your introductions, I'm also pretty confident that many of you have done more than I have done in this area and certainly made some great advancements that I probably have not. But just to give you a little bit of background about me, Marat, thank you for the introduction. I've been around for a while. I started in health information management back when we called it medical record science. And that has been an exceptionally good foundation for the type of work that I've done and the teaching that I've done over my career. I also have BS and master's degrees in education. I always, I think, intended to be a teacher. It took me a little bit of time to find out what I wanted to teach, but I have had a very satisfying career in education. My doctoral degree is in healthcare strategy. And it's, again, the foundation in health information, my interest in healthcare quality and safety, my work experience in utilization management, quality management, all of those, I think, come together very well in a skill set that has allowed me a lot of opportunity to make choices about what I want to teach, what I want my scholarship to be aimed at, and has allowed me to build an exceptionally strong network of healthcare and business and management professionals that have enhanced my career. So after I finished with my health information management degree, I did work in healthcare organization for a while. I did consulting, so I have experience in pretty much all types of healthcare organizations, from acute care hospitals to ambulatory care, home health, long-term care. But very quickly, I realized that, again, I really did want to be a teacher. So I joined the faculty here at UAB. And I have taught in health information management, healthcare management. I've taught all levels from freshmen to doctoral students. And that has been a gift in a lot of ways, that it has allowed me to understand how students progress in their learning and to be able to tailor my teaching to the level that I'm working with. I, certainly can say that the freshmen will keep you hopping, but working with graduate and doctoral students, you keep learning as well. And that's something that I have found has been very important, is to continue to learn and continue to evolve in my own career and knowledge in what I'm doing. So for the last 15 years or so, I've been primarily an academic administrator. I've been a program director. I've been a department chair. I was even interim dean for 3 months. That was sort of fun. But my focus has been on developing academic programs, evaluating their effectiveness, and working with getting and keeping those programs accredited and maintaining that. So again, those are all skill sets that contribute to everything I do. But thinking about how I got engaged in exploring MHealth, that's one of those, I would call it serendipity. And a lot of my life has been serendipity, and probably the most interesting parts have been. One of my doctoral colleagues, Donna Malvey from the University of Central Florida, we decided we wanted to collaborate on a scholarly project. We had worked very well in our doctoral program. We had continued our relationship and continued to do some collaborative work. And I will tell you, Donna is the brains of the outfit. We called ourselves the Donnas. There were two of us. Some people said Big Donna and Little Donna, which I thought was better than Young Donna and Old Donna. But just like, what do we want to do? We know we want to do something together. We know we want it to have a scholarly impact. So we started thinking about, what were our areas of interest that overlapped. And obviously, we both came out of the healthcare strategy program. I had a background in information management. Quality and safety had long been a focus for both of us. So we just started doing basically some broad research and looking around at what were some emerging issues in those areas. And one day we looked at each other and said, you know what? All of these things come together in MHealth. This was in, I'm sorry, was there a question? So this was in 2013. So things weren't as advanced digitally as they are now. And we thought, well, let's see what we can do with this. Let's see where we'll go. So we ended up writing a book, which was a little bit more aggressive than what we thought we were going to do. But there was just so much information and there was so little published in the area that we felt we could make a contribution. So our book, MHealth, Transforming Healthcare, was published by Springer in 2014. What we got very excited about was 2 years later, we had a request to have it translated into Chinese. Very, very exciting for us in that it had been well received to that point. One thing I know is that you learn a lot while you're researching. So by triangulating where we wanted to go and then fleshing out the areas, we need to figure out the actual content areas and develop those out. So that was a fun project. In fact, that was so much fun, we just kept finding other things to do in the area of MHealth. And one of the first things we did is join an editorial board, the MHealth Journal, which is an open access peer-reviewed publication. And that gave us the opportunity to collaborate with some really smart doctoral students and junior faculty as we invited them to write papers for the journal. We also participated in SDPS workshops in 2016 and 2017. Those were fun and again got us engaged with people we had not met previously and allowed us to collaborate with new people. Again, if you surround yourself with smart people, you will learn and you will develop better yourself. If I can give one piece of advice to the students who are on the call, I would say find your collaborators early. Find one or more people who has congruent interest with you from your research and scholarship perspective. But very importantly, find someone whose style is very similar to yours. When you collaborate with someone else, the ability to both contribute to the product and to have it come together in a sort of a seamless way that looks as if it really is a joint product, but is not disjointed. So in 2016, we worked on the health data life cycle. And that was something I was working on with another project, is the life cycle for information management. And Donna and I presented that as well. And then in this 2017, we talked about rural healthcare and aiming for the AAA. But where we really got kicked off, I think, was in 2017 when we edited a special topics issue for the MHealth Journal on MHealth infrastructure. And we had 6 or 8 doctoral students and junior faculty who contributed to that project. And that worked very well for us. But the more we got to digging around into what MHealth is and what MHealth likely will become, the more we saw that everything involves everything else and that it's a very open field. There certainly has been more scholarship and publication since we started, but there are so many ways to look at MHealth and what happens around it that there's something in there for everyone. And listening to the introductions this morning and the work that all of you are doing, you've validated my belief that MHealth looks like this Venn diagram, that there's so much overlap and there are so many ways to focus your interest and what you intend to do and where you can take your own scholarship, that it's almost endless as how it can be approached. It's a something for everyone agenda. For us, we continue to focus on healthcare strategy, information management, quality, and safety, but there are so many other things that can be done. So while we were working on the infrastructure journals, the paper that I developed out the most was skills training for clinicians. What we know and what you can't escape from is that healthcare is very technology rich and it is highly regulated. So it's almost as if you always have opposing components. We're now technology centric. I mean, everything associated with healthcare has become very technology based. And in fact, the point of care definition has evolved. When point of care became a phrase in healthcare, it meant that we could capture information at the patient's bedside. We thought that was what mobile computing meant, that you could roll a laptop or a desktop attached to wheels, that you could roll that to the patient's bedside, and we thought that was mobile computing. But that is not the way the world is now. It's a completely different environment, and healthcare is delivered, accessed, and evaluated everywhere. So for me, the key function in this patient-provider encounter is the information exchange. Is the providers have to extract information from patients in order to do their plans of care and treatment, but the patient also needs to be getting information and be an active partner in that information exchange. And more, we also need communication among providers, so that where I see one provider today, my information needs to travel with me when I go to see another one. The smartphone has become everyone's friend. Probably most of you on this call have health information tucked into your phones. I mean, the most recent example, it's when we all got our COVID vaccines. The university created an app so that we could click and download the evidence of our vaccination into our smartphone wallets. And that would have been unthinkable long ago. For a while, we could have at least taken a picture, but our campus created an app just to download the evidence. So our technology competencies to operate in this MHealth environment, the authors that we researched from would, some said, well, these are not novel skills. They've been here, they've been doing years. But where it evolved to is it basically is a new skill mix. While the skills to employ MHealth technology are not necessarily new and they are not novel from the skills that are used in any type of technology encounter, for the most part, these skills were not developed in the context of their professional body of knowledge, and they weren't developed with that body of knowledge. So for many of our healthcare providers, they were trained in a non-technology manner. It's a new world out there. So my proposed model for the training that needed to occur basically had 5 content components, but those content components for delivering this service in this manner, you have to have the clinical and professional body of knowledge and skills. That's a given. So ideally, we would like our providers who are being trained today to develop these skills concurrently with their body of knowledge, and ideally, again, to learn them in interprofessional teams so that you are building a stronger relationship and team delivery approach. But it still has to be developed in the organizational context, because every organization is going to have a different a different way of doing business. And I do want to acknowledge that Courtney Garza, who is one of my graphic designers here, created my model, and she made it look way better than the one that I used for the article that was published, because I'm not this skilled. This is also a good time to point out that the one person on here unknown to all of you probably is Chris Reed, who is my video technologist, who's also recording this for us to use in the center. So in breaking down our the model, I'll begin with digital communication skills. I know it's for the younger ones of you, it's hard to imagine that we still have healthcare providers who were not digital natives. It's I'm one, for example. I remember when I was doing my dissertation, it was very exciting because I had a word processor to do it, and I didn't have to do it on a typewriter. So it's, y'all can imagine not having technology that is a tool for you to use for anything you want to do. I would also suggest that social digital communication differs from the complex communication that's required in healthcare. It's very frustrating for me when I see texts that come across from students, and it is, let's say, abbreviated words, misspelled words. We don't worry too much about what an exchange looks like among friends, but everything that is produced in a healthcare encounter is a legal document. And it has to be accurate. It has to be as comprehensive as it's needed to be used probably at some point in a court of law. So the difference of learning to text, learning to talk on a Zoom, it is still different from what you do with your friends versus what we expect our healthcare providers to do. Depending on the medium that's being used, there may be no auditory or visual cues. So the ability to exchange the information and get the nuances that you need are difficult. So what we've concluded through our research is that this is really a behavioral skill. The technical piece of being able to use the equipment it's easy for most people. It's sort of intuitive, but being able to deliver a healthcare encounter digitally is behavioral. And the way we learn is through doing it, evaluating it, getting feedback, and continued practice. So one suggestion we made in our paper is that clinicians and student healthcare professionals need to do digital on-call, that they are working with a preceptor and they deliver their work, and they get feedback and they practice until they are independent. Now, we ended up being very reactive, that one day we all got sent home and we closed down our clinics and we closed down our healthcare providers. And suddenly everyone is going remote, whether they knew how to do it or not. So we got a lot of practice in the last couple of years that we didn't anticipate having. Second component was technology literacy and usage. Although technology is ubiquitous in healthcare, that alone will not transform healthcare. We have to use it for specific purposes to achieve specific outcomes. And the second part of this statement is the part that clinicians often miss. Those required outcomes may be organizational and financial. They are not all clinical. Some, of course, are going to be clinical, but the piece that I think with this training focused on learning these skills in collaboration is that we better merge the clinical and the business functions of healthcare. And they are both important, but There are times when the clinical component is more important, but there are times when if the financial component isn't addressed, there will be no clinical component. So knowing how to use all of these individual pieces also does not mean that you can provide an integrated delivery of care or that your service delivery model is going to work well. So it all has to be integrated and work together. And that's why the design teams need to include persons from all disciplines, not just the clinical disciplines, but also technicians, engineers, business people. Our goal is that a technology-based service delivery is equitable with an in-person encounter. They are not likely to be equivalent, but equitable, satisfactory to both the provider and the patient. So it is very important. What we learned is that the organizational context is a piece that often is missing. When we train without the nuances of the organization. And while the clinical rotations can show a big picture, as a student moves through a variety of organizations, each one may be different, and they're going to build some skill sets from being in these multiple environments. But the reality is their landing place where they are actually the provider delivering service. The organization's policies, procedures, and the technology they use and their culture all are going to affect the overall delivery. So then we get into the business pieces of deploying. The clinical benefits can't be optimal if your business model is unsound or if the delivery model can't be sustained over time. So this is where Murad and I often have disagreements over the importance of the business side of things. And that's very true in healthcare. It certainly is true in the programs we have here. People go into healthcare because they want to help people. They want to take care of people. They are service oriented. And often they are service oriented almost to the exclusion of having a business focus. And that's why we need both business people and clinical people working together. Because if you don't have a sufficient business model, you can't continue to deliver the service. So what this requires is those who are responsible for designing, building, and deploying these MHealth models have to respond to multiple stakeholders. And they have, it's not just, I mean, understanding the technology is essential, but it isn't sufficient. You have to have that in the context of it being a true business model. So ideally, all the people who are working into building this model are doing this together and using the knowledge of the team, which certainly is going to be much stronger than the knowledge of the individual. But this also implies that these clinicians need to be trained in team dynamics, in decision models, conflict management, consensus building. I know that we include that in our health administration and healthcare management training. I don't know the extent to where those are built into the clinical training models. But one way to approach this is we suggested that perhaps using scenarios and role playing, simulation, but very importantly is self and peer assessment of the team outcomes. Most of us have been trained very well and are competent to evaluate our own performance. It's more challenging to evaluate the performance of the team as a whole. And then the big piece in healthcare, of course, is regulatory and compliance. Regulation is pervasive. What we know is that one information security breach can cost millions of dollars and put the healthcare organization at risk, not only for financial errors, but for media attention that none of us want. So my advice is, know the players, know the rules. Compliance is a very complex discipline. And Michael, this is why I always defer things to you. You need attorneys. You need people for whom this is their body of knowledge. It's not something, and it's why we need a big team of people to make these things work. So most of our academic-based clinical training programs will include instruction about the rules and regulations that apply to that particular discipline or that healthcare profession. But regulation is dynamic, and you always are learning and always, in my opinion, you're barely up with the game. You never get ahead of it. So that's a different training approach in that we include it in their original training, but it has to continue throughout their career through workshops, webinars, newsletters, any way that you can continue to drive this. And these are internal communications, but your health professionals also need to be very involved in their professional organizations, because they are going to likely provide focused training for that particular discipline. So the fifth component is the technology business case. And this is where often there is, let's say, some disagreement or conflict between the clinicians and the business people, because they may have competing agendas. So, but again, unless your business model is sound, your clinical model will fail. So cost and revenue has to be balanced with clinical outcomes and access to healthcare. And ideally, you need to evaluate those at the same time to achieve the outcomes you want. So this is where team-based learning approaches are very important. Case analyses, again, simulation and role-playing. In my opinion, these things need to continue even after the major training has been completed. This is an ongoing learning process. Our simulation center on campus does a lot of clinical simulation, but they are starting to branch out into some business simulations as well. And this has long been a technique in healthcare strategy training, is using simulations, likely scenarios, what might happen, what's the worst that could happen. But again, the organizational context is extremely important in that you have to evaluate your proposed models and your current models concurrently with that organization and what the needs of the organization are. So again, when we were thinking about this, we were looking at two things that I ended up overlapping. One is the technology hype curve, which I'm sure quite a few of you are familiar with, that when something new comes out and the developers are excited and there's a lot of promotion and we're trying to bring it to market, we're trying to get it to go. And so everybody's excited and things are happening. And then it doesn't quite pan out quite as we expected it would. And so there's a dip in what we get versus what we thought we were going to get. But again, over time, we settle out to what the product actually can deliver consistently. And we have a sustained productivity approach. If you overlap the adoption curve, then the innovators are jumping in right at front. They're there when it's developed because they see what they can do with it. The early adopters are coming in fairly quickly. But by the time we get to sustained productivity, those who are risk averse, let's say, that by the time we're at sustained productivity, everyone who's going to be in is in. But I have been very interested in looking at acceptors and adopters at what point. The early adopters take the greater risk, but often achieve the greater benefit. But for developers, those who are bringing products to market, maintaining those expectations and not having that terrible drop can make a difference in how much adoption occurs. So what I saw with COVID particularly is, MHealth was chugging along and gaining traction, but suddenly when everyone got sent home and you couldn't get in to see a provider, it became the way we do business very quickly. So often, this is certainly a disruption, and disruption often is an accelerator to adoption. And that's what happened with us. We now are doing things by technology basis or digital or mobile means that we would not have done. And it's working very well. I would have preferred that we adopted my training model and taught our providers how to make progress and to train them how to do it. But, there's nothing like being thrown in and taught to sink or swim. So we achieved what we wanted, which is to have more mobile health options. It wasn't pretty for some of it, I think. So what we're doing now, where we are, I'm working on another series of papers for the MHealth Journal. This one I'm calling MHealth on the Periphery, sort of what's happening on the margins. I wouldn't say it's not terribly different from the concept of the infrastructure, but again, COVID pushed forward some things that wouldn't have happened otherwise. For example, one of the papers, the distribution model to deploy devices, one of our local rehabilitation organizations, Lakeshore Rehabilitation, we have a research collaboration with them, and because they couldn't bring their patients in for treatment, they began to do more through mobile health and home health and telehealth, expanded their telehealth center, but discovered that one of their barriers was that their client population didn't have the technology they needed to receive services. And it's a disabled population. Their mobility is extremely reduced. So they, can't say, come by and pick your things up. So they ended up creating a very functional distribution of buying the stuff that was needed, packaging it, and shipping it. Amazon didn't have the market on everything. We were doing a lot of shipping too. But that would not have happened if the patients had been able to be transported in and receive their treatment. So I thought that was a very unusual, that on the periphery for me, that we didn't think about needing to worry about distribution of the actual MHealth devices, but we did. Another one that was very interesting to me is our students in our school couldn't go to clinical sites. Those of you who are familiar with health professions education know that probably 25 to 30% of the entire curriculum means they need to be in a healthcare organization being trained to do their jobs, but they couldn't go because they weren't allowed in the facilities. So our occupational therapy program created, and it was student designed and student led, they created a wellness program that the students could lead these wellness training classes, and it qualified as one of their lower level clinical rotations. So the students created a free clinic, a wellness, suffering from life stress, which all of us were and are, and the students were able to log clinic hours through patient engagement through this activity. Michael has a paper in this series as well. And Raj Gurupur, I think Raj is on the call. He has paper in there. And that's where we are now. We're sort of still looking at things. I'm not competent to do anything about assessing a device, but I am interested in how this works with the people, getting it to the patients. And I'm also interested in how it works for the organization as a business model. How can we make this happen? Patient satisfaction, access, cost benefits, all of those things are interesting to me. So that's what I've been up to and what I'm interested in. So I would ask, what are things that are emerging or of interest to you that you want to move forward? Some of you talked about what you're doing and how these are related to what I'm talking about. But I would suggest that, again, MHealth is a something for everyone agenda, and we can find a lot of ways that we can collaborate and do some meaningful work. Murat mentioned that I'm co-directing the Integrated System Center with him. That's, again, one of those serendipity things. I sat next to Murat at a UAB dinner one night, and the next thing I know, I'm working with the center and working with SDPS and meeting people, and it has been just it's given a lot of life to what ought to be the end of my career here, to meet new people and just look at areas that I have not investigated before. So, questions? Are there questions?